Wigs. Two of you. I'm not talking to two of you.
What if the most beloved stars in Hollywood history were living a secret double life? Right in front of millions of viewers, Johnny Carson knew. For 30 years behind the Tonight Show desk, he sat across from 8 of America's most iconic actors, smiled for the cameras, and kept secrets that would have shattered careers overnight. Before he died, he finally revealed the truth. Let's begin with the most shocking revelation of all.
At agricultural school, I got interested in trees.
1. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson epitomized masculine perfection for millions of American women throughout the 1950s and 60s. Tall, devastatingly handsome, and effortlessly charming, he became one of Hollywood's most bankable romantic leads, starring opposite Doris Day in comedies that cemented his image as the ultimate heterosexual fantasy. His appeal to women was the foundation of his entire career, which made what Carson knew all the more extraordinary. The irony was remarkable, recalled a former Tonight Show writer, privy to Carson's private reflections. Here was Johnny, night after night, interviewing the man that women across America fantasized about, knowing that Hudson's entire public persona was a carefully constructed fiction designed to hide his homosexuality. Every appearance on The Tonight Show created intense behind-the-scenes anxiety for both host and guest. Carson knew Hudson was gay. It was an open secret in Hollywood circles. But he also understood the devastating consequences exposure would have had. Every interview became a delicate dance around the truth, with both men fully aware of the landmines surrounding them. Hudson's agent, Henry Wilson, had engineered his entire public life, including arranging a marriage to Wilson's own secretary, Phyllis Gates, purely to protect the fictional image that made Hudson a star. But the marriage lasted just 3 years, from 1955 to 1958, but served its purpose in quieting the rumors that threatened to end his career. Johnny described it as institutionalized lying, said a longtime friend of the late-night host. He wasn't judgmental about anyone's sexuality, but he was deeply troubled by the elaborate machinery designed to deceive the public. As someone who interviewed people for a living, being forced to participate in these fictions bothered him more than people realized. The tragic culmination came in 1985, when Hudson died of AIDS-related complications, becoming one of the first major celebrities to succumb to the disease. His death forced the public reckoning with his sexuality that he had spent his entire career trying to prevent. Carson was deeply affected. He felt that Hudson had been trapped inside a system that denied him the basic dignity of living authentically, and that his own role in maintaining these fictions had become increasingly difficult to justify as he aged.
Which view would you prefer?
The one you're blocking.
2. Cary Grant. Cary Grant defined sophisticated masculinity for generations of moviegoers. His impeccable style, transatlantic accent, and romantic pairings with Hollywood's most glamorous actresses created the image of the quintessential ladies' man, one that endures in popular culture decades after his death. Yet behind the carefully polished persona, Carson knew a very different story. What particularly fascinated Carson was Grant's long-term domestic arrangement with fellow actor Randolph Scott. For over a decade, the two shared a Santa Monica beach house that Hollywood insiders quietly dubbed Bachelor Hall, a genuine domestic partnership hidden in plain sight throughout the height of both men's careers. Johnny found it surreal to sit there discussing Grant's marriages, all 5 of them, knowing that the most significant relationship in Grant's life was with another man, revealed a writer who worked closely with Carson. The performance required on both sides of that desk was extraordinary. The two weren't exactly hiding. Fan magazines published photographs showing them exercising together, sharing meals, and relaxing by their pool, images that today would be immediately recognized as depicting a couple. Yet studios successfully presented them as bachelor friends, splitting expenses, and audiences accepted the fiction without question. Carson had tremendous empathy for the psychological toll this took, noted a former Tonight Show producer. He understood that Grant had developed an entire performative identity. The Cary Grant persona was itself a creation, a carefully constructed role that allowed the man-born Archibald Leach to navigate a hostile world that would never have accepted his authentic self. Grant maintained the illusion through 5 marriages to women, relationships many historians now characterize as classic lavender arrangements, designed to uphold a heterosexual public image while providing cover for his private life. In his final years, Carson reportedly expressed deep regret at having been part of the machinery that sustained these fictions. The talk shows, magazines, and publicity apparatus that built narratives about stars, bearing little resemblance to the human beings behind them.
That is for me. He's a great man and a good man. Already.
3. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy's relationship stands as one of Hollywood's most celebrated love stories. A 26-year romance portrayed as the epitome of devoted partnership, despite Tracy's refusal to divorce his wife. But according to those familiar with Carson's private conversations, the host knew the actual nature of their relationship was far more complex than the romantic legend. Carson had interviewed Hepburn multiple times and developed genuine admiration for her intelligence and independence. But he found it fascinating how thoroughly the public had embraced a narrative that, in his view, contained significant elements of carefully constructed fiction. According to Carson's private reflections, shared with close associates in his final years, he believed the Hepburn-Tracy relationship was largely a mutually beneficial arrangement. For Tracy, as a Catholic who wouldn't divorce his wife, it provided a socially acceptable explanation for his separation from his family. For Hepburn, it offered a compelling reason why such a desirable woman remained permanently unmarried, while granting her the freedom to live largely as she genuinely pleased. Carson had observed over years of interviews that Hepburn's deepest and most enduring relationships were primarily with women. What Carson found most remarkable was how she lived for years with companion Laura Harding, and later maintained a decades-long relationship with Phyllis Wilborn, whom some biographers claim Hepburn privately called her wife. What Carson found most remarkable was how the Hollywood publicity machine had transformed what was essentially a close friendship and professional partnership into the century's greatest love story, noted a historian who discussed these matters with the host. Well, it was perhaps the most successful piece of myth-making in Hollywood history, and Johnny had a front-row seat to it. Carson held enormous respect for Hepburn's quiet forms of authenticity. Her preference for trousers and minimal makeup in an era of rigidly feminine dress was, he believed, a subtle rebellion that revealed more truth about who she was than anything the studios would ever officially allow.
Night in the garden, he came down my dressing room and said, "Kid, this ain't your night."
4. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando revolutionized screen acting with raw, naturalistic performances that permanently altered the craft. His iconic roles in A Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, and The Godfather established him as one of the most influential actors in cinema history. Yet Carson was consistently fascinated by the profound disconnect between Brando's celebrated reputation for honesty on screen and the carefully managed reality of his private life. Here was an actor celebrated for bringing uncompromising truth to his performances, revealed a former Tonight Show producer. Yet he was simultaneously engaged in significant concealment about his sexuality, a contradiction that Carson found both compelling and deeply ironic. Brando cultivated a powerful image as a heterosexual Lothario, publicized affairs with actresses, multiple marriages, numerous children projected across every fan magazine. Yet Carson knew, as did many in Hollywood, that Brando's private life was far more complex and fluid than his public image ever acknowledged. Brando was celebrated as the man who stripped away artifice from performance, said a writer who worked closely with Carson. Yet in his personal life, He maintained substantial fictions about who he truly was and who he truly loved. Johnny found that contradiction impossible to ignore. In his later years, Brando became more candid about his sexuality, acknowledging in interviews that he had had sexual relationships with men. But during the height of his fame in the 1950s and 60s, this aspect of his life remained carefully and deliberately hidden from the public. Carson saw Brando as someone who had found a sophisticated balance, enough of a traditionally masculine persona to deflect scrutiny, while gradually pushing the boundaries of what could be acknowledged. Persistent rumors about his relationships with other male stars, including James Dean, circulated throughout Hollywood for years and were, according to those close to Carson, taken entirely seriously by the host.
Come on. You can just point to the door to me and I'll go there.
5. James Dean. James Dean appeared in just 3 major films before his death in a car crash at age 24. Yet his performances in East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, Man Giant made him an enduring cultural icon. The quintessential troubled youth whose brooding intensity spoke to an entire generation hungry for authentic emotion in an era of enforced conformity. Carson never interviewed Dean. He died before Johnny took over The Tonight Show, but he heard countless accounts from Hollywood insiders over the years. What disturbed him most were the persistent allegations that Dean had engaged in relationships with powerful men specifically to advance his career. These rumors, which circulated widely throughout Hollywood, both during Dean's brief life and long after his death, suggested that the young actor had been pragmatically bisexual, willing to use sexual relationships with influential industry figures as a means of overcoming the brutal competition for leading roles. The public image of Dean as the ultimate rebel, authentic, uncompromising, true to himself, contrasted so sharply with these accounts of his strategic use of relationships, said a writer who worked with Carson. Johnny found it a particularly dark and sobering example of how the Hollywood system could corrupt even the figures who were supposed to symbolize rebellion against it. Among the most persistent allegations were stories about Dean's relationship with influential director Rogers Brackett, widely credited with helping launch his career, and with other powerful figures who could open doors that raw talent alone might not have unlocked. Carson was careful to emphasize he didn't judge Dean for these choices, noted a close friend. He saw it as an indictment of a system that created such brutal power imbalances that gifted young people felt forced to commodify themselves simply to survive in it. What particularly struck Carson was how Dean's early death transformed these rumors from potential career destroyers into elements of a protected, permanent mystique. His image frozen at the moment of greatest promise, to save forever from the scrutiny that a longer life would inevitably have brought.
Smelling salts because they puff up the eyes. I'm Christine Bull.
6. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich brought European sophistication and a particular strand of sexual mystery to Hollywood that fascinated and unsettled American audiences in equal measure. From her breakthrough in The Blue Angel to her landmark collaborations with Josef von Sternberg, Dietrich cultivated an image of transgressive glamour that pushed boundaries few American-born stars would dare approach. Carson interviewed Dietrich multiple times over the years and developed genuine admiration for her. He found it remarkable and quietly impressive that she had managed to be relatively open about her fluid sexuality at a time when such candor would have permanently destroyed an American star's career overnight. Unlike many of her Hollywood contemporaries, Dietrich made little real effort to hide her bisexuality from industry insiders. While married to Rudolf Sieber from 1923 until his death in 1976, she maintained well-documented affairs with both men and women that were openly acknowledged within certain circles. What impressed Johnny was Dietrich's absolute refusal to be shamed, explained a writer who worked closely with Carson. She had created genuine breathing room, space to live more authentically than most American stars could ever risk. by making her European sophistication and sexual ambiguity central to her appeal rather than a liability. Dietrich's signature style: men's suits, a deep, commanding voice, a bold and assertive presence, incorporated androgyny directly into her star image, transforming what might have been scandalous into an intoxicating element of her mystique. She didn't hide her nature. She stylized it. American audiences could accept from a European what they would have rejected outright in a domestic star, noted a cultural historian who frequently discussed Hollywood history with Carson. For the host, Dietrich represented something genuinely rare, a performer who had carved out authentic self-expression within the ruthlessly confining structure of studio-era Hollywood.
Toast to the things for which there are no substitutes. Good friends.
7. Or Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr became one of television's most beloved figures through his iconic portrayal of brilliant defense attorney Perry Mason, and later as wheelchair-using detective Robert Ironside. His authoritative presence and commanding voice made him instantly recognizable to millions of viewers who welcomed him into their living rooms week after week for decades. What Carson found remarkable and genuinely heartbreaking was the astonishingly elaborate fictional biography Burr had constructed to conceal his homosexuality. Not just a false identity, but an entire fabricated life story, complete with invented tragedies, that Johnny was forced to treat as truth during their on-air conversations. Burr claimed to have been married 3 times, with his first wife and their son allegedly killed in a plane crash during World War II. Johnny described it as interviewing a character rather than a person, said a producer who worked closely with Carson. He found it profoundly sad that Burr felt compelled to invent not just a heterosexual identity, but an entire tragic backstory, complete with dead wives and a dead child, simply to survive in his career. In reality, Burr spent the last 35 years of his life with his partner Robert Benavides, whom he met on the set of Perry Mason in 1960. They built a successful orchid-growing business and vineyard together, living as devoted partners while publicly maintaining the fiction of being merely business associates. The irony was not lost on Carson that Burr, who played television's ultimate truth seeker, dedicated to justice and the exposure of lies, they had to live a life constructed entirely from systematic deception. He saw it as one of the most poignant and painful examples of the impossible choices forced upon gay performers in mid-20th century America.
Thank you. And subsequently in arranging the marriage, you lied to the authorities.
8. Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester. Charles Laughton created some of the most unforgettable characters in cinema history. In The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Mutiny on the Bounty, and Witness for the Prosecution, while his wife, Elsa Lanchester, achieved her own immortality as the Bride of Frankenstein and appeared in dozens of films throughout her remarkable career. Their marriage lasted from 1929 until Laughton's death in 1962, appearing to the outside world as one of Hollywood's most enduring and distinguished unions. Carson found this marriage uniquely fascinating for one specific reason. According to reliable Hollywood insiders, both partners were gay, creating what was essentially a bilateral cover story that protected both their careers simultaneously. This wasn't a lavender arrangement designed to protect one partner. It was a mutual agreement that served them both equally. Here was a couple where both partners needed protection, revealed a former Tonight Show writer, familiar with Carson's private conversations. Each one provided cover for the other. It was, in its own way, an extraordinary act of mutual loyalty. Unlike some studio-arranged marriages that eventually collapsed under the weight of their own artificiality, Laughton and Lanchester maintained their union for over 3 decades, developing a genuine friendship and creative partnership despite the absence of any romantic connection between them. Carson saw their relationship as a creative solution to an impossible problem, explained a friend of the host. In an era when being gay meant career death, that they had built something that genuinely worked, a partnership that allowed both of them to thrive professionally while offering each other real, lasting mutual protection. Lanchester's 1983 autobiography described Laughton as not an easy husband, while carefully avoiding any direct discussion of his sexuality. A precise and practiced navigation of public disclosure versus private truth, entirely typical of how stars of their generation manage such sensitive subjects. For Carson, the Laughton-Lanchester story represented one of Hollywood's most quietly remarkable human arrangements. Two talented people who had looked at an impossible situation and built something out of it that endured. 8 accomplished actors. 8 private lives constructed from necessary fictions. 8 careers built on the impossible demand that the people the public adored be someone fundamentally other than who they truly were. Carson never judged them. If anything, he admired them deeply for their resilience, their discipline, and their ability to perform not just on screen, but every single moment of every public day for decades on end. What troubled him, in the end, was never the people themselves. It was always the system that had made such relentless performance necessary in the first place. The secrets he finally shared with those closest to him were not gossip. They were, at last, a long overdue tribute to lives lived under extraordinary pressure, and to the human cost of a Hollywood that demanded its stars be anything but themselves.